Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thank you for joining us. It's PagerDuty Summit here in San Francisco. It's muggy, but to me, let me tell you, it's beautiful. It's always beautiful for me here at the Embarcadero. We're at Pier 27, covering the events here at PagerDuty Summit. The theme here is Ops Reimagined. Notice I didn't say DevOps Reimagined, but Ops as in short for Operations Reimagined. How are we streamlining operations processes to make it possible for development teams and operation teams to collaborate and deliver better value to the customers? This edition of the New Stack Makers is sponsored by PagerDuty, maker of the Digital Operations Management Platform. DOM combines incident management with machine learning and advanced analytics to empower operations teams to respond to their networks and their applications before things go wrong. Download the 2017 State of Digital Operations Report now and see how IT operations teams stack up against the expectations of their customers at PagerDuty, PagerDuty.com. Continuing our coverage of PagerDuty Summit at Pier 27 at the Embarcadero in San Francisco, I'm Scott Fulton. I'm being joined today by Andy Mann, the Chief Technology Advocate from Splunk. Andy, good to see you.
Great to see you, Scott. Nice to be here. First time ever.
First time, finally get to talk to you face to face. JT Geary is CEO of nCloud.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me here.
There are going to be a few people in our audience who are probably not familiar with what nCloud is or does. So bring us up to speed a little bit, if you would, sir.
Sure, Scott. So we are a DevOps consulting company and AWS partner. We help companies migrate to cloud, help them implement DevOps best practices, and just making sure people we help to streamline their operations so they can focus on delivering great products. That's what nCloud does.
When you say you help them migrate to cloud, and AWS is one of the big clouds that probably the big cloud that you help them move toward, is the migration destination pretty much what they believe it to be when they started out, or do you help steer them in new courses that they hadn't conceived before?
Absolutely. So one of the advantages when you migrate to cloud, we don't have to migrate as it is. In some cases we do, but we like to implement best practices. If we think container is going to help them out, we try to help them containerize their apps. We make sure app is automated in the way where they can scale up and down based on the requires. Let's be honest, one of the reasons you want to move to cloud so you can scale up and down based on your business metrics, right? Mm-hmm. You can get a better ROI. And so one of our goals is to make sure when they're moving to cloud, they're cutting costs, and we do that with the help of automation and leveraging these modern technologies like Kubernetes or ECS or any kind of other containers.
Now, you've said before, and nCloud has said before in its promotional literature, that customers have two choices when making the migration, moving toward kind of a Kubernetes-facing world and a kind of an AWS-facing world. But in recent weeks, I'm noticing there are a lot of, I won't necessarily say merger, but there's certainly a lot of intermingling of those two spaces, especially as we've seen with VMware's recent move to incorporate Kubernetes-based orchestration in vSphere along with Pivotal Container Service, and also with VMware's handshaking with AWS somewhat. That brings Kubernetes more into the picture. So based on where nCloud's made that determination maybe 4 or 5 months ago, what are some of the amendments you might make today in explaining to potential nCloud's customers about the choices available to them?
Yeah, so Andy and I were speaking about this a little bit earlier. We always try to focus on what is the end goal, and the end goal is if they want to deploy code faster, they want to save cost on cloud, we focus on that. There's a lot of confusion. Mostly the concern people have that they don't want a vendor lock-in. That's why they want to go with Kubernetes. I think one of the best argument against that is if you are, let's say, tied into DynamoDB, it's really hard to migrate away from DynamoDB, but it's really easy to migrate across different scheduler because you have the core technology containerized like Docker, right? Mm-hmm. So again, we still stay focused on what are you trying to do and what is the fastest way to get you there. And in some cases, ECS is the best way to get you there. In some cases, if you have a hybrid environment, Kubernetes is the best way to get you there. So we just make that decision based on the customer requirement.
You examine where the customer state is at the moment.
Yes.
And then you make a determination based on their state and then also the state of the technology at the moment, which is in a constant state of flux in and of itself.
Exactly, yeah. And it makes it a little bit challenging, right? Because it is confusing. Everyone's like, okay, we have to go Kubernetes. And 5 months ago, Kubernetes wasn't there, but right now they have made a lot of improvements. So based on the customer needs, so maybe we pick that, or maybe we'll pick ECS, or maybe we'll pick Nomad. Sometimes the challenge is actually to containerize the app, and in those scenarios, we end up using Nomad or something like that.
Now, a lot of our regular readers will already be familiar with Splunk as the operational data collection platform. Andy, given the changes that I was talking with JT about just in the last few months, how has that made adjustments in the type of data that Splunk users should be collecting in order to properly judge what their performance levels should be, keeping in mind the fact that we're moving more and more toward cross-cloud architectures, cross-cloud implementation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the new data that's coming in, and again, JT, we were talking about the complexity of this new environment, the multi-cloud environment, also layering on top of things that like Kubernetes, containers, Docker, layering on top of that many different new dev tools. So it's all about getting a lot more of that data and trying to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. So certainly bringing in the digital exhaust, if you will. So the outputs from something like Docker containers, we've built into the Docker kernel a log driver for Splunk, so you can just emit all of the output from a Docker container directly into Splunk and start to make sense of it alongside your traditional workloads, alongside your non-containerized workloads. In a multi-cloud environment, you think of Azure, you think of GCP, as well as AWS, of course, and other clouds. Hybrid and multi-cloud seems to be increasingly the way of the world. So being able to collect and aggregate all those different data sources and see them side by side and understand, is it the container that's the problem, the network that's the problem, the cloud provider, my own system, maybe it's the endpoint device, and not to mention all of the IoT devices that you can get data from as well.
Now, some of the folks who have been implementing Splunk in their organizations have been telling me at conferences when I've talked to them about the strategies that they employ for data collection, they say more and more, we just collect everything we can. And hopefully we'll be able to find the right tools, perhaps analytics tools, perhaps machine learning tools, to help us make sense of the data we've collected. But for right now, we're just trying to gather it all. Is that a sensible strategy if organizations don't know what they're looking for yet?
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective on it. I think it's important to collect as much data as you can because, and I heard this from a customer just the other day, you don't miss the data until you don't have it. And it's very much, one of our prime use cases is about investigation on a problem. And certainly here at PagerDuty Summit, the ideas of triage and investigation are really important, and they are obviously to our customers too. So being able to find out what went wrong, you need that data to find out. If the data wasn't there, you can't figure out what went wrong, which means you can't stop it going wrong next time. Mm-hmm. So you're going to find these repeat problems. I feel like storage is getting relatively inexpensive. There are a lot of facilities we we have to be able to roll data out of expensive storage into cheaper media as well. You know, being able to roll out of Splunk's own storage into Hadoop, for example, and still be able to access that data. So I do believe collect all that data. I think it will be important. The other part of having the data is when you have it, you start to understand what you're looking at.
Yep.
And so one of the things that our customers do is ask more questions. So you ask a question, you get an answer, it prompts you to ask another question. So you keep digging deeper into that cave of data, if you will. And that's where the data provides amazing value, because you learn things that you had no idea you needed to learn, but you do it because you've got the data.
But if you learn those things, is it because you had a data scientist on hand to be able to point out patterns that you weren't going to see just by using your own 2 or 3 eyes, in my case 4, that you have to have somebody there to explain to you. You do realize that this is a pattern. Otherwise, how do people interpolate what's a pattern, what's a legitimate pattern from what's just a connection of the dots?
You see, that's where you need the machine to do more work. So machine learning is our answer to that conundrum, because the world doesn't have enough data scientists, and this is pretty well established that there's just not enough people who have that level of skill. So we employ the data scientists, we create the algorithms, we put machine learning and predictive analytics into Splunk so that these anomalies are highlighted to you. You don't have to go find them.
I can touch on this. So basically, majority of the infrastructures we're managing right now, they're way too complex, right? Because we have microservices. And when I started as sysadmin, there were only a few people making changes. Now you have hundreds of people making changes.
Let me ask you to move your mic just a little closer.
Oh, right here?
Yeah,
Is it better?
very good.
Yeah. So now a lot of people making changes, and you have far more services because of the whole microservices mindset. So with the tools like Splunk or any other tools where you get analytics, you can actually make sense of all this. Like the infrastructure changed a lot, and it's continuing to get complex. And so with some analytics tool, you can actually really understand what is really happening.
There are a number of high-level managers and executives whose present-day understanding of DevOps is kind of a function of the software that their institutions have installed. They say, oh yeah, we bought DevOps the other day. We use DevOps, we use Lotus, we use VP Planner. I've got that Quicken. I've got Quicken, and what version is DevOps on now?
Jenkins too.
Do we still have a problem today where the definition of DevOps in modern organizations is essentially established by the software that's used to institute it? And I don't want to blame anybody, Puppet in particular, Puppet, for this, but specifically, is DevOps more a function of the software than it is the ideal of collaboration?
Yeah, look, DevOps is fundamentally, to me, and I use a canonical definition from many years ago, speaking with the godfather of DevOps, people like Patrick Dubois, the idea that DevOps is about collaboration, communication, and integration between development and operations, right? So there's nothing there about technology, there's nothing there about software products. This is about a cultural change, it's a shift in the way that people work together. But I will say that a lot of organizations I've worked with will use software as a catalyst. So to automate things and understand, so for operations to be able to put into code the way that they build the infrastructure so developers can use it better. That's an integration point, which is still part of that canonical definition. I think it's important that DevOps is not software. I think it is a problem that managers, executives think it's software. But I also think that software can be a catalyst. I mean, JT, you see this a lot in your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you said, it's about collaboration. There are some software that actually enable that collaboration, like Chef or Ansible, Jenkins. But end of the day, it's all about culture, right? And if you take a step further, it's all about how can we add value to our customers fast together, not in siloed environments. So it's about collaboration. Tools can enable, but it's not all about that. As most of the leadership things, like if we have Jenkins, we're doing DevOps. That's not true.
We had a lady here who works with DORA, the organization that deals with the 2017 State of DevOps report, and we had a very in-depth discussion. Essentially about the goals of DevOps, particularly as they relate to whether the goal is collaboration, as you mentioned in your canonical definition, or whether there is a broader goal in mind. And Nicole mentioned that the goal as she perceives it of DevOps is to deliver value to customers. Thus, she said that the way we go about doing that, what it is that we collaborate on, what software we choose to use, what it is that we choose to standardize on, if we choose to standardize, may depend on the organization of the time, the task that they are currently working on. It may not be, there may not be necessarily one way to go. So I'm saying not just one piece of software. So Andy, should your definition of your canonical definition of DevOps, should we amend that a bit to say that the effective goal of that is to be able to streamline service delivery to customers?
Actually, I think we should. And I certainly look at the 3 pillars that I'm looking at from a Splunk perspective. When I talk to customers, why are they doing DevOps? Why are they doing continuous integration and continuous delivery? And there are these 3 pillars, and one is going faster. I'm facing a competitive environment. There are startups and niche players who are disrupting me. I need to go faster. But if you just deliver bad software faster, you're not helping anything, right? So there's a second pillar, and that's about quality. You've got to deliver good software faster.
Yeah.
But again, if you're delivering the best software in the world and you're doing it really quickly, but it's not helping your business to achieve its objectives and it's not satisfying your customers, then again, it's actually sort of pointless. So my third pillar is about having that business impact. And that's from an internal perspective, having that business impact. But what it really means is having the customer impact.
Yep.
And of course, DevOps is all about this closed feedback loop from the customer back to the development planning, and tight connections between development planning and the customer requirements. I know actually several customers of mine use Splunk to understand when they release software. So they're releasing software apps, mobile apps, cloud services. Customers like the BBC in the UK, they track what the impact of that release is. So release 1.789 actually increased my click-through rate by 12%. It increased my customer sign-up rate by a percentage. It increased my revenue from that web page by X%. This is the customer impact, and I think that's a really important part of it.
Absolutely. Just correlating deployments, features with what is the impact on customer, that's really important. We are working hard, and we implemented all these DevOps practices. Well, how is it translating to our customer? That's the huge metrics that everyone should be tracking all the time. And if you go back from even DevOps and lean thinking, it calls for reducing waste, right? If you're going fast and you're releasing feature customers are not using, it's not adding any value to the customer. So, you should be tracking all these metrics in addition to streamlining your operation. So, all the initiatives you're doing, it should translate to the value to the customer.
You talked about closing loops and creating, in effect, a single point of contact for customers. In this idealized organization that you paint a picture of, does it continue to make sense to have to have both the software development and operations teams be managed by separate people? Should they, in effect, have a single point of contact themselves, a single manager, a single organizer, a single department?
it's just, once again, as we went talking, we are all working together to add value to the customers. In my opinion, there's no separate departments. We are all working together, right? Devs are on PagerDuty. They're since we're here at PagerDuty, they should be getting paged, or they should be part of the escalation, right? And operation people should be part of the sprint. They should be planning all the infrastructure changes, just like how Dev planned their sprint. So it's all about working together, and if they're being managed by separate managers, that's siloed. That's what we want to get away from.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic, what they call an anti-pattern in DevOps. Because in DevOps, we don't have best practices, we just have patterns. Because if you think you're doing it the best way, then you don't try and improve. That's a whole other conversation. But one of the anti-patterns is this idea of a DevOps organization. Because you have Dev and Ops, you have two organizations, you're trying to break down silos, so you create a third organization called DevOps. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
But, and I will tell you, for a large organization especially, this can be a really good way of getting learning. So seconding some of your devs and some of your ops, and quite frankly some of your DBAs and security and network engineers and others into a separate team to figure out how to do it, to make some mistakes, to learn. I don't think a DevOps team is necessarily a bad thing, but a long-lived DevOps team does just create another silo.
Yeah.
Even some of the folks I've spoken with today at the show have had some insight as to the blank space that often appears in between the word dev and the word ops, or the suffix for those grammar teachers out there. People tend to insert something in there, and they say we're seeing the progress of DevNetOps, of DevSecOps, of DevNetOps. If I keep going through this, I'm going to look like one of those refrigerator magnet poetry things. I'm just going to have all sorts of wild syllables just portraying all over the place. And if, as you say, our goal is effectively to get everybody together at the same table, then what do we have to separate them? What is the role of roles in that organization? I know we want to demolish silos, of course, but if people are effectively exchanging tasks with each other, saying, okay, you're the incident commander one day, and I can be next week, or I can be effectively the monitor one day, and you can act as the scribe the next week, and you can act as the deputy. If we're changing those roles with each other, then where's the org chart? Do we get rid of it?
Yeah, I actually did at my the Splunk user conference last year a session which I titled, let me get this right, PMO, Biz, Dev, QA, NetSec, Ops, Biz, Customer. Right? Because it's about continuous everything.
And for you Scrabble players out there, that's 260 points on triple word score.
But something I learned from a fantastic practitioner and advisor and author in this space, a guy by the name of Jeff Sussner, is the concept of T-shaped people and I-shaped people. And so in a skill set and a role definition, we're used to having what's known as I-shaped people. So they go very deep in a topic. I'm a DBA, I know deep information about being a DBA. I know nothing on the other side of me. I don't know anything about being an operator or being a developer. Now with DevOps, I think one of the key role approaches is to look to train and cross-skill your people into T-shaped people. So they're still deep, but they have a cross-section as well. And they're connected with the organizations, the teams, the people, and the skills on either side of them. They're not, a DBA then is still a specialist DBA involved in delivering a new application. But they now know what it means to do development work. They engage in the sprint because they're part of that team. They know what it's like for an operations person to support their database that they've created and structured. So it's about cross-skilling. It's not about everyone doing everything. We still need specialists. But we do need them to communicate and collaborate across those boundaries in ways that they maybe never have before.
Is there a place in this organization for an S-shaped person, perhaps a lowercase S-shaped person? Somebody a little bit waffly. If you have an organization with more of these T-shaped people, what letter is the shape of the person who manages them?
Do we have? I don't think we have a letter in English that goes like this.
We'll go to Cyrillic. Anyone out there who understands the Cyrillic alphabet, give us a call. Give us a letter. The shape of the person who manages T-shaped people.
It's a good question, though. I mean, what sort of management do you see when you go out and about?
Yeah. So, and Gene Kim talks about this, right? There is a certain pattern that you see high-performing companies, right? And Amazon being one of them. And they have a rule that if you have a team that cannot be fed more than 2 pizzas, that means it's too large of a team, right? And basically, these people, they're self-sustained, and their focus is adding value to the customers. Somehow they figure out a way to collaborate and work together and add value to the customers. So I think maybe having small teams, that seems to work really well. I would say maybe that's one of the common patterns I see works really well, where small teams are adding value to the customers.
There are certain consultants whom I've spoken with at length who are advocates of a methodology of bimodal IT organization in which there are fast-flowing processes and there are more conventional, perhaps older, slower flowing processes, and perhaps ne'er the twain shall meet, but both styles can be synchronized in an organization. And it's an understanding, as these advocates will inform me, that there are different workflows that are necessary for different objectives, even if the same people are in charge of those objectives. The opponents of this have come to me and they cite CI/CD as effectively the catalyst or the use case against this, saying that if in order for an organization to properly automate anything in its space, it needs to automate everything in that space and not 50% or 40% or 60%. It needs to be able to have one pattern that works for everything and not set up an exception at the start of the case. So who's right?
Well, look, I'm a pragmatist. I think they're both right in certain circumstances, and they're both wrong in certain circumstances. These are the ideas of hybrid IT, and the old systems, the systems of record, don't need to be updated as quickly, and you don't need the automation and CI/CD in them. And meanwhile, we'll apply automation and CI/CD and new practices and collaboration to the new systems, the systems of engagement, mobile apps and web stores and things like that. I think it's purely a matter of pragmatics. You can't boil an ocean, you can't eat an elephant in one bite. So I think you're wrong if you think that those legacy systems or traditional systems should never be updated. If you think they should never be part of a CI/CD or a DevOps mode, I think that's wrong, because who wants to get the job that says, hey, do you want to have a job in that system which we're never going to update and it's never going to be automated and you're forever going to be stuck with old technology? You're going to run out of people to do it, apart from anything else. It's also not going to be able to be competitive for your customers. So I believe that you do have to update these systems. You have to do CI/CD everywhere. You need to do DevOps everywhere. But where do you start? Where do you get the most value? Where do your customers benefit most? And typically that will be in those systems of engagement, those mobile apps. You think about core banking on a mainframe. Is a customer going to get a better service because you made that a little bit more efficient? Or are they going to get a better service because all of a sudden your mobile app does more things for them? Probably the latter. So I think it's a pragmatic question rather than an idealistic question.
And it's kind of an unanswered question, especially among our readers of the News Stack, because a lot of them, in software development have to work in organizations where they face the fundamental reality that the software decisions that they're being made for them were made 10 to 15 years ago or longer. And they have to integrate with those systems because perhaps they've not fully amortized, but perhaps they're still delivering value, and the use case for replacing them with something else that may be newer but delivers the same value may not be a very persuasive case. So given the fact that there will be various software systems that customers will always have in place, how do you then look at them and say, okay, your next step is to move to the cloud, because boy, oh boy, will things run better there? What if the objective is essentially to run things the same way they have been, only on new infrastructure?
So we actually were working with this large IoT player, and it used to take them up to 2-3 months to deploy code, and it was done manually, very error-prone. But the reasoning was that this stuff cannot be automated, and I'm sure you guys heard that before. This is too complex; it cannot be automated. And after we got engaged with them, it took us about 6 months. Now they can deploy code every day, right? But they said their client don't like change every day, and they wish to deploy once a week. But that's a choice every company should have. You should have that kind of automation in place, where if you want to, you can deliver faster every day. But if your customer is saying slow down, maybe you don't want to deploy every day, you deploy once a week. But you should be in a situation where you can deliver value, and it turns out in that customer, for example, we were able to it kind of transformed their company, and it got acquired by a bigger company just because their DevOps offering was so appealing, and now they're going to apply the same principle in the bigger company who acquired them. So I think this is the common misconception where people are saying, oh, this is too old, this is not worth the investment. But in some cases, once you do the investment, because you already have a customer base, you can actually take those products and be a thought leader in the market space, because now all of a sudden this is a cloud offering. Yeah.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the shoes and or socks plus sandals of the company that just got acquired in order to put itself in that position. Its DevOps offering was very persuasive, and the big company said, heck, we're not going to reinvent the wheel here. Let's just acquire this and put it to work. Step one becomes integration. You have to integrate this brilliant new idea with the systems that were already in place by the acquiring company. Unless, correct me if I'm wrong, the acquirer is saying, okay, we're getting rid of it, but chances are that's probably not what's going to happen. You're going to have a point of integration, and it's forced on you, because now those people are now your bosses. They're now paying your paycheck. You're going to have integration. Thus, how do you fulfill that objective and then effectively fulfill Dr. Nicole's suggestion that we end up delivering better value to the customer? If we find ourselves in a situation where we are acquired, don't we spend 2 or 3 years staying on the ground we're at because we're trying to integrate with the stuff we've now collected in front of us? Or we're trying to break even at this point?
So, we were working with that IoT company for a year, right? So just when startup raises money, that doesn't mean the battle is over, right? That's when the work actually starts. So now we get to work with this new company, right? We try to, we take a pragmatic approach, figure out where we can propagate what we've done with for other company, and maybe it's a CI/CD pipeline, maybe it's collecting more metrics. What can we do where we can start adding to our value to our customer, and how can we extend this framework which we built for this one company? And that's we work with over 100 companies right now, and we over time you get kind of good at implementing the same processes across other companies. So we're gonna, just because this was acquisition, that doesn't necessarily mean game over, right? This is where the job actually starts. Now we start to propagate these best practices to the other company.
Andy, your thoughts on integration and delivering value simultaneously?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah, and I've seen so many different acquisitions happening, and sometimes they are deleterious. Sometimes it's distracting. It takes up capital. It takes up people, and you do end up losing business sometimes. But if you're doing it right and you've got good people to help you, then the integration, again, it doesn't have to happen overnight. So you can start integrating by sharing and collaborating on education, on knowledge transfer. You can start integrating individual systems, sharing data, and that's one area where a lot of our customers use Splunk in their acquisition and M&A strategy as part of sharing information across teams in real time. So you start to get visibility. So you start to be able to understand what those other teams are doing. You start to be able to learn from their practices, and then you can start to maybe integrate at a technical level and maybe automate some cross-team tasks or maybe even entire processes. And so I do believe to get the value, to get the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of value, which everyone's looking for out of acquisitions, you absolutely need to leverage what you get and integrate it into your core offerings. But I don't think you need to do it all at once. Start where you are. I can't remember who said that, maybe Jez Humble. Start where you are. You've got this asset, you've got your existing assets, so what can you start to pull the thread and start to pull that out and make value out of it?
Yeah, and sometimes you don't want to, you have to pick the right project, right? If you pick it too small, it'll stay under the radar and you never make progress. If you pick like mission critical, high profile project, then all eyes on you. And if you fail, they're like, oh, we're not doing this DevOps, right? So you just have to pick the right project and you have to have a buy-in from leadership. And those are the projects we see that have the most success.
Common theme I've been invoking in my questions with people here today comes from a hero of mine, Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who famously phrased the concept of change as an understanding of from what and to what, understanding the endpoints in the journey and having a clear understanding of where you've come from and where you're going to. Is there a point in the DevOps journey, if you will, as it has been phrased here, where there is a milestone that we as an industry can point to, where we can effectively say with respect to this stage of the journey, it's done, we're there, it's time to turn a corner?
I don't believe there is. I believe that DevOps especially is a continuous process. It's about continuous learning. And again, you mentioned Gene Kim earlier on, and he talks about this idea that the end state, if there is one, is this culture of continuous learning. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking at something that is continuous, there is by definition no end point. So I think that it's about continually doing better. And doing better, you can measure things, and Dr. Forsgren is amazing in terms of understanding what are the metrics and the measurements that you can put in place to understand if you are one of the best practitioners or if you're underperforming. And so the State of DevOps report talks about things like delivery speed, time from idea to delivery. I think about idea to cash. I have an idea as a business leader and I want to get this in front of my customer and make money out of it. How long does it take for that to happen? How long will it take for you to get this in prod? If you can shrink that cycle time, that's a big win. But it might be about quality. Some of our customers are NBC Universal here in the PagerDuty Summit. They were just speaking, and they're focused on delivering a really high quality outcome for their customers, for their viewers and the people on their websites. And so they can measure things like Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction, and start to benchmark and raise the bar for themselves. Yet others are looking at straight up things like revenue or engagement or something like that. There are definitely ways you can measure measure these three pillars that I was talking about: speed, quality, the business impact. But if you think you're done, then you'll stop trying to do better. And I think that's a death knell for technologists.
And I would like to echo that. Like, there's no stopping, right? So we have fully automated infrastructures with proper config management. Now we're learning that we can get a better speed if we move to containers, right? There's only way you can stay competitive is if you keep evolving, right? Companies like Google, they are so far ahead of everyone where even any developer could introduce new microservice without involving operation, right? And we're trying to get to that for some of our companies we're working with, where if you want to introduce a new service, you shouldn't have to involve anyone. So I don't think there's stopping. The only way you can stay competitive is if you continue to evolve.
But isn't it difficult, at least, I won't say impossible, but at least difficult, to catalyze people on the journey that you're talking about, organizations on the journey you're talking about, if you cannot consistently give them a picture of what success looks like, if you cannot say, this is where you're going toward?
I mean, there are wins along the way. You know, if you have your CI/CD pipeline automated, now you can deploy 5 times a day or 10 times a day. Now your customers are getting value. When I say maybe when there's no end, but it's not like there's a big bang type of benefits, right? Along the way, you're gaining so much. You're being competitive, but we are so fortunate right at this time that we have so much technology available to us, like Kubernetes, ECS, or Nomad. These were the tools only available to like Google's or Amazon's of the world, right? So just saying that that the ROI is so far down the road that we're not going to invest into it right now, I think that just doesn't make sense. So answer your question, we can get wins along the way, and we see companies doing that all the time.
And I don't know, I can't remember, maybe it was Emerson or Thoreau was talking about that life is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly.
But it doesn't mean you can't stop and take stock of where you are and what you've achieved and what you've done before you move forward onto another part of your journey.
Where can our viewers learn more about nClouds?
nClouds.com, and I'm at JT Geary at JT Geary on Twitter.
So at JTGIRI on Twitter.
Yes.
And Andy, where can folks learn more about Splunk and the Splunk platform?
So Splunk.com, but specifically for CI/CD and for DevOps topics, go to Splunk.com/DevOps, and of course we're at Splunk on Twitter.
And that's SPLUNK.
Correct.
And for all of you Scrabble players out there, that's only about a 16 at best. Anyway, Andy.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
You.
Thanks,
JT,
Scott.
good to meet you.
Thank you.
More from PagerDuty Summit here in San Francisco. I'm Scott Fulton. Stay tuned. You've been listening to the New Stack Makers, sponsored today by PagerDuty. Learn how the PagerDuty Foundation supports community programs such as technology career coaching and talent recruitment at pagerduty.org. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcasts. And take a moment, please, rate and review us on iTunes and like us and follow us on YouTube. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.